morning and a very warm welcome to the Cambridge University Land Society's ESG webinar on decarbonisation of the residential sector, kindly sponsored by Savills. My name is Ami Kotecha and I'm chair of the CULS ESG and Sustainability Forum, and I'm delighted to see the level of interest and the fantastic turnout that we have for this morning's event, where our panelists will discuss the challenges we face and the opportunities that exist in taking action to decarbonize our homes, all in the presence of an unprecedented and impending crisis in our energy bills and the looming threat of widespread fuel poverty. But before I go on to introduce our panelists, a quick word on our society and on the ESG Forum. CULS is one of the oldest alumni societies at the university that continues to thrive and to contribute to thought leadership for the built environment sector. We enjoy a close relationship with both the Department of Land Economy and the Department of Architecture in a variety of ways, including our annual awards of prizes to support scholars and our very well-attended annual careers fair in November, to name but a few. We formally established the ESG Forum as a result of your resoundingly positive response. Thank you to all our members and guests that we've been receiving for this webinar series over the last 18 months, where we have invited industry leaders, academics, policymakers, and authors to discuss a wide range of ESG topics in the way that CULS does it best. Our ESG Forum's aim is to tackle topics using a multidisciplinary approach. We invite domain experts, such as those that we have on our panel today, to share their insights and to discuss what we believe is the most important aspect of ESG, the intersectionalities and the codependencies that we know are really key when it comes to considering some of these very difficult issues. With that, I would now like to introduce our panelists in the order that they appear on my screen, and then hand over to our chair to open today's discussion. Firstly, we have Sam Balch. Sam is the Deputy Director of Home Retrofit and Energy Using Products in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Next, we have Manish Datta. Manish is the Director at the UK Green Building Council and is also Fellow at the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. Last but not least, we have Ian Heasman. Ian is the Director of Sustainability at Taylor Wimpey, which is one of the UK's largest house builders. And our session will be chaired by none other than Lucian Cook. Lucian is a director in the Savills research team since 2007. Many of you will have seen Lucian in national media. He's one of the UK's most authoritative housing market commentators. I recommend that you visit our website to read our speakers' extended bios. And I would also like to say to you that this event is being recorded, and the recording will be available in a couple of days via Savills. And with that, over to you, Lucian, and thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, Ami, and welcome everybody to this event. By the clicker on the bottom of my screen, I can see currently we've got about 676 people online watching us. Somewhat daunting for the assembled panel, but this is going to be an absolute belter. We couldn't have a topic which is more at the front of our minds in the aftermath of COP26. We've had a mountain of pre-submitted questions, and if you would like to ask a question during the course of proceedings, you can do so using the Q&A function, not the chat function, the Q&A function, which you will find within the master and wonderfulness of Zoom. I think it's going to be an absolutely cracking debate. And I think it's particularly interesting that we're looking at the residential sector because, to my mind, it is something of the problem child of the property sector in the challenge of getting to zero carbon. Whilst emissions from that sector fell by 21%, between 2008 and 2014, according to ONS data, in the period from 2014 to 2020, they've gone the wrong way. They have gone up by 9%. So no doubt that progress is needed. Just shy of 70 million tonnes of carbon emitted from residential property in 2020. And indeed, that's approximately 20% of the UK total. So there are some real challenges. If we're going to address it, the challenge is big. Let's just get a very quick idea of the scale of that challenge. It's estimated that to get to a target of EPC level C by 2035, where reasonable and practical to do so, we need to increase our level of investment in energy efficient works by a figure of some 7 times. And that's just one step on the road to zero carbon. But against that context, we simply couldn't have a better panel to discuss these issues. A lot of the focus, it has to be said, is going to be on retrofitting existing stock. And there are some really big policy challenges affecting change in the affordable housing sector, giving significant competing demands for capital amongst housing associations and other registered providers. Securing the investment from private individuals and funding that investment in an already heavily regulated private rented sector. And then looking at the owner-occupied sector, where perhaps some of the challenges are greatest, where the policy levers to effect change are much more difficult. And so it's against that context that I'm particularly delighted that we've been able to secure Sam on this particular call. And I'm sure that he's going to give us some amazing insight into the policy environment and how indeed that may change. What's the role of new build? Well, for me, the role of new build is showing us what the art of the possible is. So to have Ian on the call with all of experience, his long experience with Taylor Wimpey, I think is going to be absolutely essential. And of course, to achieve all of this, we're going to need a strong, coordinated response right across the property sector. And in that respect, to hear from Manish, I think he will add that sort of multi-dimensional dynamic to the debate. Finally, from me, one thing I wanted to check, we're now up to 781. For that 781, I wanted to remind you that this is not a bring your own bottle event. This is very much a Zoom event, and we are reflecting here sort of on getting to the heart of the challenges that we're dealing with. What we're going to do is start with 5 minutes from each of our panelists. Then we're going to go into a discussion. Within that discussion, we're going to try and pick up as many of the pre-submitted questions as we possibly can. Then towards the back end, we're going to try and pick up on those Q&A numbers. And we've already had one in from James, which is absolutely superb. So James, thank you for the first submitted question. Let's see what we can do in terms of getting those numbers up. So look, let's start. Let's start with Ian. Ian, could you just give us very quickly 5 minutes on how the house building industry is addressing the challenges, what we can learn from your experience, and then maybe a bit of a comment on the application of regulation and innovation within that sector, and just maybe the clues that might give us for some wider solutions.
Great, thanks, Lucian. That's a lovely introduction. I'm really proud of our sector. A couple of years ago, we got together with small, large and medium-sized house builders, with government, with NGOs, with regulators, a whole bunch of people to develop something called the Future Homes Task Force. And now we've developed something called the Future Homes Delivery Plan, which is an almost transformative blueprint for the sector going out to 2050. And in there's lots on carbon, both carbon in use for houses, but also embodied carbon, but it covers all the environmental issues, water, biodiversity and waste and others, and it covers things like design. So we've actually got a template and something now that the new build industry can work with and work towards. So that's been a fantastic start. Within Taylor Wimpey, we've also got our own response to that. We've been doing a lot on policy and strategy. Last year, we launched our environment strategy with science-based targets, which are targets in line with the Paris Climate Change Agreement to decarbonise our entire value chain. We work very closely with investors on TCFD and disclosure, and a tremendous amount of work going on carbon metrics across our whole value chain. Of course, there's a big regulatory piece as well. And there's the Future Homes Standard, which is slightly different to the Future Homes Task Force and Delivery Plan, and that's solely around climate and carbon and ventilation, and looks very much towards zero carbon homes, all electric homes, removal of gas boilers by 2025. Now, there's 2 steps to that. There's an initial set of building regulations that's coming in from June this year and will be mandated from June next year. And then sort of 31% reduction in carbon, and then a 75 to 80% reduction in carbon by 2025 through the Future Homes standards, and that will be the big move. That will enable new homes to be zero carbon ready. There'll still be some electrical input there. And when the electricity grid finally gets wholly decarbonised, and the government's got a target date of 2035 for that, then homes will be truly zero carbon from that date. So what do those homes look like? Well, we've got very careful plans, obviously, for the first set of building regulations, and there we're bringing in a lot more photovoltaic panels. We've looked at the fabric of the building. We've introduced thermal break lintels. We've got things like wastewater heat exchangers and flue gas heat exchangers on boilers, triple glazing, and things like that. But the big change happens after that in 2025, where the actual source of heat changes. And largely, the industry is looking at one solution at the moment, which is for mass market housing, which is air source heat pumps. Now, these are a technology that is fairly low in terms of uptake in the UK, but there's more experience in some other countries like Northern Europe and Scandinavia and Switzerland. And there's a need to increase the market size of air source heat pumps substantially over the next few years to get to a place where we can truly rely on them for mass market house building. Now, all of this has taken a lot of innovation and research and development, and certainly I've never seen so much in house building. And it's for good reason, not least around our stakeholders. Our customers are asking for more. They want technologies that will be future-proof, that will be environmentally friendly, that will save them money. A complete change in the investor landscape with a lot more questions and dialogue with them around our approaches in this space. Local planning authorities, 3/4 have declared climate emergencies, so there's a huge amount of dialogue through the planning space. And of course, employees, retention and recruitment is critical. People are looking to work for organisations with purpose and with good sustainability credentials. So it's become absolutely central to our business.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ian. I think somebody may, let's just get rid of that feedback. That's absolutely superb. Some really encouraging stuff in there. I think the fact that the technological advance and the investment which we're seeing in your sector is at a scale that we haven't seen previously is encouraging. Clearly a long way to go. And I was also particularly interested in your point that this is something which consumers are beginning to actively demand, because it seems to me that the consumer demand is the thing that ultimately is going to drive the investments much more widely. So look, that's a bit of a backdrop in terms of what's happening in the new build sector, and I'm sure we're beginning to form some opinions as to how that might apply to the big retrofit that is required. Sam, I wondered if you could give us 5 minutes on the current objectives of government and some of the current and policy levers that you see being employed for that existing housing stock to meet that huge challenge to get our EPC levels down, to get towards zero carbon by 2050.
Sure, happy to have. So in terms of, if you look at this decarbonisation, achieving net zero in the timescales that we have is obviously a sort of the central priority for us in terms of decarbonising the housing stock. As part of doing that, we need to make sure that we're keeping energy bills low as well, particularly for those that are most vulnerable. And then also thinking about some of the economic opportunities associated with this transition as well, in terms of growth for new industries and new supply chains as well. So what I thought I would do is briefly set out the heat and building strategy that we recently published, and then talk in a little bit more detail about what we're planning to do on existing homes. So as Lucian has outlined, the challenge is very significant. We've got about 30 million buildings in the UK. 30% of national emissions come from those buildings. Smaller proportion from homes, but it's a very significant number. 85% of those buildings are currently connected to the gas grid, and with a smaller number on sort of direct electric and LPG and oil. 35% of the homes that we have in the UK are pre-1945 homes. So we have a very high proportion of older, harder to treat properties as well, which increase the scale of the challenge. And in order to get to net zero, we're going to need to make sure that we have effectively decarbonised pretty much all homes by 2050. So the heat and building strategy is our attempt at setting out how we will address this challenge. It's a comprehensive long-term plan which sets out the major building blocks for how we're going to achieve this transition. So firstly, we're going to focus on improving the energy performance of buildings, particularly in homes. We've set this EPC ambition by 2035. As Lucian alluded to, this is a step on the road towards getting to net zero, but an important one in terms of making sure homes are warm, efficient, and can support the transition to low carbon heat. We are looking to phase out fossil fuel heating. So we're aiming for no new installations of gas boilers by 2035 and phasing out higher carbon fuels off gas grid in the mid-2020s. We are looking to reduce costs. So we're looking to bring down the cost of this transition for consumers, and we're trying to get the enabling policies in place so people are able to act easily, affordably, and the propositions are attractive. So that's things like green finance, advice and information can play a really important role here. As part of this transition, we need to support the most vulnerable. And we're looking to do that through targeted subsidy and support, particularly for low income, fuel poor households, and making sure we have appropriate protections for them. Some of these technologies are going to be new. So investing in innovation and supporting its development is going to be important, particularly around the role of hydrogen. So we're looking to trial hydrogen for heat, firstly at a neighbourhood scale by 2023, at a village scale by 2025, and then potentially at a whole town scale by the end of this decade to look at its viability as a source. And we'll be looking to make strategic decisions on the role of hydrogen by 2026. Another thing that we're looking to do is grow the supply chains and markets for these technologies. So we are looking to boost the kind of UK manufacturing capability and sort of supply chain to service this, particularly with things like heat pumps. So we announced as part of the heat and building strategy, a £450 million boiler upgrade scheme, which we'll be launching shortly. And this is looking to help build supply chain for heat pumps. We're looking to get to a target of 600,000 heat pumps by 2028, which is a significant growth from where we are. The final thing that I think we're looking to do is make sure we get the conditions for major investment right, so that we're able to attract, mobilise private finance, both into the properties themselves, but also into the sort of the industries and the manufacturing capability that we're going to need here. So in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to say the sort of the key components. So we're looking to phase in higher minimum performance standards, minimum energy efficiency standards across all tenures by 2035 to get to EPC Band C. We also set out in the net zero strategy that we're looking at what a backstop date would be for a net zero minimum standard that apply to all homes. We're looking to strengthen product standards. So these are the energy using products that go into those homes. So we recently published an energy related products framework that's looking to raise minimum performance levels for a wide range of products that are being used in those homes. We're looking to make sure, as Ian alluded to, that new build homes are highly energy efficient and are ready for low carbon heat as part of the Future Home Standard. And we're investing further funding in terms of supporting lower income households and the social housing sector in particular. The final thing that's going to be really important here is the role of green finance and how we can mobilise investment. As Lucian talked about, the investment required here is very significant, and quite a lot of that will be private investment rather than public investment. So making sure there are attractive, low-cost green finance offers are really important. That's it from me, Lucian.
Brilliant, Sam. Thank you. I mean, there is a whole host of stuff in there, I think, to unpack. You know, three key ways of tackling, or three key planks to tackling the challenge in existing stock. And I think during the debate, we're going to come back to some of the policy levers that are available and perhaps some of the implications which that have for different parts of the property sector. So look, that's 2 out of 3. As Meatloaf once famously said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but let's make it 3 out of 3. Manish, could you just give us 5 minutes, just a little on industry standards, and then perhaps a little bit on the role of different players within the sector and how they might reach some common goals.
Good morning, Lucian. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. Delighted that we've now ticked over the 900 attendees mark, which is great. Let me just start really by just mentioning who UK Green Building Council are. For those that don't know us, we are a charity with an industry-led network on a mission really to radically improve the sustainability of the built environment. And we represent the voice of over 630 property construction cross-sector members, all striving for transformational change right across that full property value chain. And I'm just going to repeat some of the stats we've heard already. 48% of emissions from the UK built environment are produced by energy usage within existing homes. This represents 16% of total UK domestic emissions. And of this, 62% are produced by heating, predominantly via fossil fuel boilers. These are really stark numbers and incompatible with the UK target of net zero by 2050. So improving domestic energy efficiency and enabling a transition away from fossil fuel heating in particular must form a fundamental element of the UK's net zero pathway. So with this in mind at UK GBC, we're calling for an urgent national programme of home retrofitting, which will transform UK housing, create warmer and cheaper to heat homes while bringing health and wider societal benefits. And this is very much in line with what we've been hearing from Sam and also the Construction Leadership Council National Retrofit Strategy. Retrofitting our homes was a key theme of the UK Net Zero Whole Life Carbon Roadmap that we launched at COP26 a couple of months ago. The roadmap provides a shared vision and a set of actions for achieving a net zero carbon UK built environment by 2050 in relation to the full value chain from construction to demolition, both in buildings and infrastructure. And we convened it at UK GBC. It was produced through a widespread consultation with over 100 organisations right across the industry, and indeed was created by the sector for the sector, and government also represented in that consultation. And I think it delivers a comprehensive but achievable plan to transition the industry and its subsectors to net zero. So the main elements include a carbon footprint for the UK built environment and net zero carbon trajectory to 2050, as well as policy recommendations and industry action plans to deliver the 2050 scenario. And the roadmap identified 5 key priorities which government and industry need to support and implement right across the sector in order to deliver that end goal of net zero by 2050 for the built environment. And these priorities are a call for, the very first priority is a call for nationwide retrofitting of existing homes. It also includes energy performance disclosure for non-domestic buildings, adaptation of design for adoption of design for a performance approach to new buildings, whole life carbon measurements and agreed limits which take into account both embodied and operational carbon, total carbon, and national infrastructure investment based on net emissions impact. And I'm not going to go through those 5, we're going to focus on the first one, but a full set of resources is available on the UK GBC website, and I'll post a link once I've finished. So let's just focus on that retrofitting of homes. And there are some really key priorities within that overall recommendation. Firstly, it's to establish an immediate national programme of fabric first home retrofit to make homes efficient, warm, and transition away from fossil fuel heating. And it's really important that approaches to heating systems and building fabric improvements are treated as interdependent. They're not independent devices. For example, it's crucial that heat pumps are deployed in tandem with sufficient home insulation to avoid poor system performance, higher running costs, and associated risks to already quite fragile, may I add, consumer confidence. Integrated and holistic performance standards will also be key in this regard, whilst mitigating risks to consumers around poor quality building works. The second key recommendation out of the first major finding of our work in the roadmap is to bring forward the cutoff date for the sale of gas and oil boilers to 2030. The wholesale transition from a dependence on fossil fuel domestic heating to zero carbon technologies is, I would add, one of the fundamental challenges that the UK faces in its path to net zero by 2050, with a significant role, we believe, in heat pump technologies. And the starting point for this domestic heating pathway is that there must be no gas boilers in operation by 2050. That, I think, Sam has also confirmed just before me. But there are some important interim steps, we think. We must end sales of gas and oil boilers by 2030 and deploy heat pumps in 80% of our homes by 2040. And yes, I agree, there are roles for hydrogen in homes, particularly near industrial clusters too, but it's not we don't believe it's a wide scale technology that can apply everywhere. The third major piece of sort of finding in our work has been we must reform EPCs and introduce minimum EPC ratings for homes at point of sale by 2028. Now, what do we mean by reform EPCs? Well, we need to establish in-use energy performance as the rating metric as opposed to cost, reduce the performance gap, the difference between intended and actual energy performance. So it's not a theoretical guidance, it's actually a practical guidance. And also, we must use it as an instrument to disincentivize gas usage and enable EPC ratings fundamentally to be used as a meaningful regulatory driver in reducing emissions by 2023. We want to accelerate the SMETAs project, working towards the incorporation of actual measured energy data into EPC methodology. We also we support the development of digital building renovation plans, or passports as they're known as, that inform evidence-based retrofit pathways for existing building stock varieties and are held in a central, openly accessible property database so that we understand how we're performing in real life. To close, in addition to contributing to our journey to net zero, upgrading our homes will bring multiple benefits to wider society. And this has been confirmed in the Construction Leadership Council National Retrofit Strategy as well. Just some numbers, 500,000 new higher skilled jobs can be created from this opportunity. Significant economic boost for existing repair, maintenance and improvement firms and supply chains. Lower energy bills, that is hot topic at the moment. On average, we are predicting £430 saved on current prices, which is 2% increase in household disposable income per annum. Never before has this been in the spotlight than in recent months, even in recent days. And £56 billion worth of health benefits linked to improved air quality and thermal comfort, with 6,000 avoided deaths per year. So the last point I'd make, and I think we might come back to this, Lucian, is this also enables us to achieve better levelling up right across the country, enables us also to tackle that massive and important social issue of fuel poverty as well. I'll stop there and look forward to the Q&A. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Manish. I don't know how much coffee you've had this morning, but just as I just hold off for a little bit now, because you are on fire as things currently stand. That's absolutely brilliant. Look, we've had a great discussion. There's a load of stuff here on being hydrogen ready. There's a lot. Never did I ever think in my career I would be hosting a debate with so much discussion about gas boilers, but that just goes to show that wonderful path that we take through our long and varied careers. Look, one of the things I'm going to pick up on straight away, and just for the panelists, this is the 6th point that I put on the list when we did the prep. There's been a lot of talk about EPCs. I've seen the questions flow in. We're currently running at 39 questions. There is no way we're going to get through all of them, but a common feature which is coming through these questions, and I think it's put quite well by Chris Gardner. Chris has said, would the panel agree that EPCs are not fit for purpose? So I would ask the question: do EPCs need more rigor? Is there a better metric? Or is it a bit of a case of just loving the one you with? And I'm just going to finish off. There was one quote that was pre-submitted, which I thought sort of sums it up. Why cannot EPCs estimate the cost of remediation with better accuracy? And this is the killer. It seems to me that there are too many cowboy operators who issue meaningless certificates. If that doesn't sum up the problem, I don't think anything else will. So look, Sam, should we start with you? Where are you generally on the relevance and use of EPCs? Is there a better metric?
Thanks, Lucian. Yes, I think this is a good question, and it sits at the heart of quite a lot of our policy proposals as well. So we want EPCs to be sort of accurate, reliable, and informative, and to support better decision making. And we published an EPC action plan fairly recently, which sets out, working with Deluxe, how we're going to improve the robustness of the EPC framework, given that we're going to be putting increasing reliance on it. As you've alluded to, there are several sort of questions for us around how we use those EPCs for the purpose of regulations. One of those is around the metric used. Currently, the metric on an EPC is an energy cost metric, although we have recently reintroduced the carbon rating as well. So the environmental impact rating has now been added back onto EPCs, and making sure that we're using the right sort of metrics in order to deliver the policy outcome that we need is important. And in our recent consultations, we asked questions about kind of which of the metrics is most sort of achieves our policy goals most effectively. There's another challenge for us around the methodology, because obviously this is based on SAP or RD-SAP, and making sure that that methodology is as accurate as possible is going to be important. Manish, I think, was talking about the role of actual performance data as opposed to model performance data. In the long run, that's very much, I would say, the vision of the government is to make a transition towards sort of leveraging smart meters and sort of in-home temperature data where consumer consent allows, to provide more accurate assessments of the actual performance of the properties. But even in that world, you will still see a role for SAP, I think, and we will still have to continue to improve SAP. And then finally, there's the sort of making sure that assessors have the right training, that there's appropriate kind of controls to make sure that any rogue assessors are dealt with sort of swiftly, so that people can have confidence in EPCs as a framework to help drive the transition that we need.
Brilliant.
Sorry,
I mean,
long, multifaceted.
That's all right. That's right, Sam. I just love the idea of dealing with rogue assessors swiftly and efficiently. That sort of brings to mind sort of public floggings in the street and bringing back the stocks. I'm sure we're not going to quite go that far, but what I mean, there's some really interesting stuff in there, isn't there? Because clearly there are very significant improvements that can be made to EPCs, and there is also, it would appear, consumer demand for better information about the energy performance of our homes. And Ian, it sort of goes back, I think, to some of the comments that you made earlier. The new build sector is at the forefront of doing that because they're putting it in day one. What have you learned? What can you say you've learned in that area?
Yes, so I agree with people's reservations around EPCs. I guess it's slightly different for new build. We've got a very small panel of expert consultants that do our EPCs for our whole stock, so we don't have those quality concerns. In addition, almost all new homes come out as B or A in EPCs, and we see them very much as an output of the SAP process to get through the building regulations process. So in some ways we see it as an administrative output that we are legally obliged to give to our customers, but I'm not quite sure that it's very central to our business, because it doesn't drive the energy efficiency. The building regulations do that. So it's not really a huge big deal because of the relative energy efficiency of new build, plus other factors that I've described. EPCs don't feature very strongly in our thinking.
Okay, fantastic. Manish, I'm going to come to you on the next question. And this one is really, we've heard an awful lot about targets. We've heard quite a lot about metrics, and we've heard quite a bit about policy. We've also heard about issues of things like fuel poverty, which is, if you like, an inhibitor to look at things like consumption taxes around energy. This is a massive challenge. We're going to need a whole host of policy levers. What I wanted to get was a sense is, what's the balance? What do you think the balance is between carrots and sticks, policy carrots and sticks, to make this happen? Where does the balance sit between incentives, grants, which it feels like could be a bit of a drop in the ocean, regulation, which is clearly going to put a cost on the owner or the consumer, and if we're able to touch on it, maybe a little bit about taxation, something we haven't talked about. Manish, would you like to pick that up to start with?
I think it's an excellent question, Lucian. I'm going to give a fairly safe answer to it, which is we need a perfect combination of all, don't we? I mean, it's finding that perfect balance between policy to drive demand, finance to enable investment, and industry to deliver high quality retrofits at scale that is required. And so a clear trajectory and regulatory framework, mandatory minimum EPC ratings for owner-occupied homes at point of sale, as I've already said, a clear trajectory around minimum energy efficiency standards for the domestic rented sector to at least EPC C or equivalent under updated EPC methodology, as Sam's mentioned, by 2028. And clear signposted cutoff dates for the sales of things like gas and oil boilers are needed as well. And there are some fiscal, you talked, the last part of your question was around the fiscal incentives. So we've done some work with Bankers for Net Zero, which is with the APPG for Fair Business Banking as well. We've looked at a number of fiscal incentives and learned from other sort of case studies, I guess. So variable stamp duty rates adjusted in line with the energy performance of a property is one way you can achieve that. House buyers for example, would receive a reduced rate if a property is above a certain energy efficiency rating, and an increased rate for less efficient properties designed to be fiscally neutral. What about removing VAT on refurbishment work? 0% VAT on work that would enhance the energy performance of a building, particularly where energy performance targets are met, so that could incentivize homeowners to invest in energy efficiency improvements, et cetera, et cetera. We think council tax reform, perhaps variable rates and rebates dependent on energy performance, could be another instrument to use. And already Sam's mentioned, directing government grants for low-income households to support both energy efficiency improvements and the installation of low-carbon heating would be very good. And then really mobilizing the private finance sector. So incentivizing banks and lenders to offer low-interest mortgage extensions and loans for retrofit for landlord and homeowners where energy performance improvement targets are met. And last but not least, which is very current flavor, I suppose, is adjusting the gas and electricity tax regime, which currently is very heavily leaning towards favoring gas, for domestic customers to incentivize the shift to heat pump technology whilst mitigating risks to those in fuel poverty. So that's a sort of range of things. And it's not as if we haven't got a track record of learning from previous lessons. So when we were trying to catalyze the solar PV industry, for example, there are lessons that we can learn from how well and how badly that may have gone. Wind is another way that we can think about on how we can, the introduction of mass wind in the UK. There are a lot of lessons to learn from that. So we're not starting from afresh. We do have a track record of achieving some success in this space.
Okay, look, there's some quite radical stuff in there, right? The one that struck fear into my heart from a purely financial perspective is that sort of minimum EPC requirements at point of sale, particularly for those of us who might live in a listed building. And I thought your comments around it, so it strikes me that taxation is going to have to play a role at some part. Clearly, it requires Treasury to get on board with that. Sam, just bearing in mind that some of these have a significant cost implication for owners and could have unintended consequences in terms of the value of property, perhaps, and indeed, for example, in the private rented sector, whether it causes some landlords to reassess their investments. Just give us an indication as what's realistic from a policy perspective. Is it realistic to expect to have minimum EPC standards at point of sale, or will government simply go down and just say that's a step too far on the consumer? And practically, where would the exemptions to that stop? Are you happy to pick that up, Sam?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a quick go answering that. Yes, and so a number of stakeholders have called for the idea of minimum performance standards around the point of transaction. There's and we've seen evidence in devolved administrations of action around thinking and action around this area as well. So I think overall, whatever government does here, will need to make sure that it is sensitive to wider sort of housing market impacts, and I think make sure that we get the balance right in terms of encouraging action and being seen to give the tools to drive improvement. I think that the important thing to bear in mind here is we are already seeing a significant differential in property value across the EPC range. I think even Savills might have done some work on this. We've and Cambridge University have done several reports for us, both on house price value and rental yield, showing their kind of a positive correlation through hedonic price studies. So I think we would obviously need to think hard about how we did this, and we would want to make sure we're talking to consumers. We haven't explicitly said that we're going to be doing acting at this particular point around this kind of transaction point, but it's clearly something that we're thinking about at the moment.
Okay, so Sam, very kindly, you've referenced the work that we've done on values, and I think the issue that we have around the valuation of stock is that yes, there is a brown discount for very inefficient homes, and yes, there is something of a green premium for very efficient homes, but there ain't a lot of difference for the stuff in the middle. And that seems to me to be one of the problems. So just one question, it's a bit theoretical, but this is Cambridge University Land Society. We're allowed to do that. And I'm going to draw Ian in a little bit on that. do we think that consumers actually will invest unless and until it's reflected in the value of their home? Ian, what's your experience from a new build perspective?
Okay, well, I think there's sort of a historical perspective and a future perspective on that. So from a historical perspective there, as you said, the green premium hasn't really emerged. And certainly the sort of conventional historic wisdom in my organisation is that if you invest £15,000 of green in a home, largely you won't recoup that. Now that's different in different markets. So in the central London market, there's almost an expectation that the bells and the whistles and the green will go in there. But in a lot of the markets that we build in, the goal for consumers and customers is to actually buy a house, and actually some extra cost in there is actually quite negative, both for the customer and for us trying to sell those homes. Now I see that as changing quite radically, in particular where there's a requirement not to have new gas boilers in second-hand homes. I think that's potentially a really significant boost for the new build sector. So if a customer in 2035 on current government plans, or 2030, as Manish was saying, that the UK Green Building Council would like to see, that they're going to have to choose between a new home and an old home. And in the old home, they're not only going to have to put in a brand new heating system, but they're going to have to really pump up the insulation in that home to make that heating system cost effective to run. There may be investments of several tens of thousands, and yet all of that is already embedded and fully within a new build home. So I see these regulations as actually favouring, and these changes actually favouring new build over second hand for lots of the customers.
And I think we can see that. I mean, there's a major challenge, isn't there? I think just one of the statistics of some of the research that we've come out is that when you start looking at the homes that are pre-1900, 47% of those are currently rated E, F or G. So they have got a long way to go with significant levels of investment. And it's on that point that I think there is a particular issue, which a number of the questions have addressed this, particularly from some of those who have got sort of large portfolios of rural property. And that is, where do we get the balance right between zero carbon and protection of heritage? No, specifically, how do we deal with our listed property? So there was a lovely question that came in before the seminar. I'm going to read this one out. Holders of old listed properties are faced with red tape and restrictions that increase the cost of reducing heat loss to a point where it just isn't economic, but it's also unaffordable. Isn't the climate crisis serious enough to justify scrapping these restrictions, or at least creating a class of permitted actions, wall insulation, replacing old doors, that do not require specific approval? Who wants it? Munish, do you fancy having a crack at that fella?
Thanks, Lucian. I think the point made by the person who posted the question to you ahead of this webinar is perfectly made. I think the time now is that our regulation, particularly around plannings of regulation, needs to be commensurate to the climate emergency we face, and currently it's not, particularly with listed buildings. And whilst I'm a great fan, I live in Cambridge, I know Cambridge well. Cambridge has a lot of heritage architecture, as we'll all know. I also know that those are some of the most unfit for purpose buildings going forward from a carbon point of view. So we do need regulation to enable the retrofitting of those. There needs to be some reform there. And I also think there's a whole raft of solutions now coming on board. And in fact, I'd point attendees of this webinar to our solutions library on the UK GBC website, which enable the retrofitting of challenging buildings, including listed buildings, to happen more easily than one would have thought. So, you know, that we need a combination of the right solutions being deployed, as well as allowance from a regulatory point of view, from a planning point of view, to do those really well. At the Institute for Sustainability Leadership, for example, where I'm a fellow, we're refurbishing a 100-year-old telephone exchange on Regent Street here in Cambridge to make that our new headquarters. And there's some incredible lessons that we've learned from how we've had to work with the local planners to enable, for example, the changing of windows from sash windows to triple glazed windows, to enable that to happen. That hasn't been easy for us. That has been quite challenging. So we do it, but it need not be, I suppose, is the point I'm making. It needs to be a lot easier to be able to do that.
Okay, fantastic. Look, we've got loads of questions coming in. There's absolutely no way we're going to get, if we did, we wouldn't be finished before 5 o'clock this evening. And because I've been asked to be chair, I'm going to overrule some of those questions and just ask questions that I find interesting. I know it's wrong, but I can't help myself. And one of them is, we've got 2 big consultations that have been out and we're awaiting responses on. One is on the private rented sector, and ramping up the minimum requirements there and reducing the exemptions. But the other one's one that I find really interesting, and that's the role of finance, not just in terms of green finance and finance to improve specifically to fund improvements to our stock. The other one is this concept about setting lenders targets for their loan book, and whether or not that translates into a slightly stratified lending market with different costs of finance and different terms of finance, depending on your energy efficiency. Sam, you'll be fairly familiar with that. Is that the way that you think, you know, one of those strong leverage points, because there aren't actually that many in the owner-occupied sector unless you do it at point of sale? How can it work, and what happens to the people who haven't got a mortgage?
This is one that my team has sort of published. So this is improving the energy performance of homes through lenders. And yes, we looked at consulting on setting disclosure requirements for lenders based on energy performance rating of stock, and the idea of an improvement target. We had some really good feedback during the consultation about how you might design improvement targets that drive sort of lending to improve properties, as opposed to stratification, where you see sort of lower cost lending to more efficient and higher cost lending to less efficient properties. So we're sort of currently considering all of those responses, and we'll be looking to publish the government response shortly. I think you're right. It's lenders have an important role to play here in terms of consumers thinking about using lenders as sort of source of third-party finance to make improvements, given that we know the costs of these improvements are likely to be significant. They also have good relationships with their customers, trusted relationships as well, and are able to offer advice. So they can play, I think, quite a powerful role, and we are already seeing lenders starting to act, and we're having some very good discussions with them. So we're seeing new products being brought to the market, helping consumers think about how they can respond and what kind of improvements they can make. So I think they will be a powerful ally in terms of this transition if we get the regulatory design right.
Yeah, it sort of strikes me that that's slightly, you know, you're slightly, that somewhere sits between the carrot and the stick, doesn't it? It's not quite the stick that you need to have a minimum EPC standard at point of sale, but if it starts to affect your cost of finance or the availability of finance, it's going to strongly encourage you to invest. So I think that's an area that we'll all be watching very closely. The questions keep flying in, 73 questions. Could you ever imagine having a panel discussion with me as chair with that level of engagement? It is almost unheard of. A lot of those are around technology. A lot of those are around the merits of hydrogen, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. So what I want to get an idea is to invest in those technologies, because part of that's just going to be about the capacity to deliver that stuff. And Ian, I just wanted your perspective. Where's the critical mass to invest in some of these technologies from a new build perspective? Is there a size of scheme that you're going to say, look, I'm not going to consider biomass district heating unless I've got more than X units? How does that sort of fit against your PV, your ground source, air source heat pumps? You know, where, just give me an idea as to where it works in scale.
Sure. So, I mean, the critical point is around air source heat pumps and the need to upscale those quite radically. We don't really look at a development scale. We look at an organisation scale, and we're about 15,000 homes per year. So, as been said by other panellists, there's perhaps about 30,000 installations of air source heat pumps today, and the government's got a target, I think it's 600,000 by 2028. So that's not just the supply chain and enabling that to scale up radically, but it's also about integrating that into the build. It's about having the skills across a whole range of different supply chain players in order to do that. And it's about having the certification skills to enable that that's done right. And then it's about having the maintenance skills so that we're not kind of making our customers guinea pigs and giving them this technology that then breaks down or doesn't work in the way that it should, and then they don't have maintenance and repair options of value to put to that. So there's a whole range of issues around upscaling new technologies very quickly. There's also the sort of customer interactions. the homes will feel different in terms of the heating. We're very used to getting homes really lovely and toasty and warm within 30 minutes with a gas boiler. Will that be the case with an air source heat pump, or will that be a lot slower? What will be the interface, and will people that perhaps are older people who are perhaps always already struggle with their heating controls, will they be able to run them as effectively? So there's all sorts of sort of customer issues to think of. So it's not a trivial matter, changing technologies that are so fundamental to people's lives at scale.
Yeah, if anyone out there can design some kind of control system that allows you to operate the temperature or heating at the press of one button and one button only, you are going to make a significant sum of money. I would venture. Look, there's a question in here that's come in from Stephen Brown. New heating sources seem to be in their infancy. We need a new boiler now. Should we buy a more efficient gas boiler or look at a hybrid gas boiler with an air source heat pump? Price difference is substantial. It ties into a slightly bigger question for me. How do we deal with the issue of technological obsolescence? Because there's going to be some resistance from people like Stephen to do it now when the cost is high, if they think it's going to be out of date in 5 years. Manish, are you happy just to give us 2 minutes on that?
Yeah, great question, and I think a challenge that's faced by many consumers. Before I answer that, I just want to refer to some evidence, some sort of research that we did with the Green Finance Institute on kind of the reticence or perhaps the nervousness of consumers in taking up green technologies. So these are, green home technologies are not seen as aspirational by consumers in the way as some other sustainable products might be, for example, electric vehicles. And retrofitting, going back to the supply chain comments that Ian's made, is not seen as an aspirational sector to work in within the industry as a whole. So there's some clear barriers there. And also consumer awareness about what needs to be done to improve energy and the carbon footprint of buildings is actually, research shows, is generally quite low. And there are some specific concerns about some side effects, such as ability to operate technology, the noise that the technology would create, and these are prevalent, and that all affects the perception of adoption of these technologies. To answer the specific questions around technological obsolescence, I think that's a very, very important consideration for the industry to have in mind. I think there is a challenge around the life cycle of a technology and the life cycle of an asset. Of a typical building home asset. I think there's a challenge around how can we make those upgradable and flexible in time. Traditionally, gas boilers haven't been that. You've had those for years and years and years. Can we take the opportunity as we switch technologies to make sure that as we put new technology in, that it can be adapted quite quickly for changing requirements and new technology that comes on board? I think those would be my general observations around that. I'm not a green home technology expert, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. Sam, have you got any perspective on that?
So I think I would say that our approach at the moment is very much a market-led approach. So we're looking to, with heat pumps specifically, we're consulting on introducing a market mechanism that will apply to gas boilers that will help to drive the cost reductions in sort of heat pump, low carbon heat deployment. That should help with bringing the cost down, helping consumers make that choice decision. We're also looking at a consultation coming up on hydrogen ready boilers, so that you have the boilers that are going in the coming years are kind of future-proofed, subject to decisions on hydrogen and the role of hydrogen as well. I think the view of government in terms of the heat and building strategy is at least over the next few years, helping to support consumers to make choices, helping to grow the market steadily, both from the demand side, but also from the supply side in terms of the skills and capabilities, so that we can get to that 600,000 target. But it is a challenge. I have to be honest, this is going to be a big challenge, and I think it will require government to work very closely with industry and across industry to deliver this kind of transformation, and this next decade is going to be very crucial to that.
Right, look, we're beginning to bump up against the 9:30 hard stop here. I think, Sam, fantastic points made there in that this is a big challenge, right? So I'm going to give each of the three of you, now this is almost the big finish, I'm going to give each of the three of you a magic wand. And you're allowed to do three things, anything you like, that will make a material difference to the decarbonisation of our homes. What are the three? Ian, let's kick off with you.
Well, I opened with the Future Homes Delivery Plan, and so if that didn't exist, I'd wave my wand to create that. So that's a fantastic start. But now just creating the plan is just the first step. So it's all around having enough collaboration, enough energy behind it to really deliver a long-term vision for sustainable homes in the UK. So it's about building capacity, building enthusiasm, enabling SMEs to participate, etc. So that's my first one. The second one is around looking beyond the homes. Our calculations indicate that the purchase goods and services, the supply chain, is an equal issue to the energy in use in homes, and yet is fabulously under thought through compared with the energy efficiency of homes. So we need a lot more focus on embodied energy, and not just embodied energy in materials, but in the earthworks, the roads, the sewers, and everything that goes into development to make that work. And the third one, I'm sure others will have good things to say about that, is around the old stock. We've got 28 million old homes. We're only building about 200,000 new homes per year, and really a huge amount of energy needs to go into solving that problem. We've had a couple of false dawns where perhaps the support schemes either haven't been generous enough or haven't really considered the supply chains enough, so really need to unblock the existing stock piece.
Brilliant, thank you, Ian. Look, so I've cheated in that I've said everyone will have three, but we're running out of time. So Manish, you've only got two. And Sam, you can see what's coming next.
Okay, so I think I'm going to repeat one of the ones that Ian said, which is collaboration. Finance, business, and policymakers and the end consumers need to work together to make retrofits of existing homes the core of UK's net zero transition. And the second thing I'd say is we need the right policy package, unlocking financial stimulus, unlocking supply chain readiness, and also really, really raising consumer awareness around this so that we can get some demand side pull as well.
Great, fantastic. Sam, you know what's coming next. You've got one. You've only got one wish.
Manish did about five.
Come on.
Manish did about five. There's two.
Come on, you got one.
I think my final thing would be making sure over the next 5 years we're really focused at making sort of building the supply chain and the capability to support this transition through targeted funding, through advice and information, so that the market is ready for the introduction of longer term minimum standards as these are introduced in the sort of the second half of the decade.
Okay, fantastic. Look, so I'm going to hand back to Ami very quickly, but I wanted to finish. We had about 70 pre-submitted questions in here, and there was one single one that stood out for me, and it's anonymous. It's from an anonymous source, and I'm going to keep it anonymous. So this is what they said. Retrofitting is enormously expensive and disruptive. When I mentioned external installation to my neighbours in the Victorian conservation in which I live, they were aghast. This is where it starts to get serious. I can't even persuade my wife to engage with the subject of making our rooms smaller. Apparently, they are small enough already. So you can start to see some of the resistance we're getting in there. And if we're going to give a piece of advice today, one single piece of advice, it's to that individual. And for that individual, I say, look, don't just look at the webinars from Cambridge University Land Society. You should also be seeing what Relate have on offer in relation to energy performance. That might just be the thing that saves your marriage and makes your wife happy. So there we are. That's it from my side of the panel today. I would like to say a huge thank you to Manish, to Ian, and to Sam. I think the level of debate has been outstanding. To all of you on the call, the questions, remarkably intelligent, remarkably detailed. I can only apologise for the fact that we haven't been able to get through all of them. I think it's a wide area of debate, but thank you all very much. I'm going to hand you back to Ami to close.
Thank you very much to all our panelists and to Lucian for an exceptionally lively discussion on this morning's webinar. We've heard about massive ambitions to address the issue from a policy and an investment perspective, and that combating climate change is a team sport. We've heard that zero carbon technology solutions are key to unlocking this issue, but that we are still not hitting the critical mass, partially due to supply chain issues that underlie that adoption. The areas we're seeing uptake on are automating whole life carbon related disclosure and lowering our reliance on static EPCs, which is great. I would also add that automating decarbonization pathways is very crucial. I would like to end by saying a big thank you again to our panelists and to our excellent chairing from Lucian, and as always to our sponsors, Savills. A quick reminder for our future events. We have one coming up on the 9th of February at 8:30 a.m. where we will discuss the aftermath of the COP26, and our panelists will take a check on the availability of sustainable finance and the uptake and the challenges that we still face in deploying that for our sector. And after that, we have another event in March, on the 8th of March, hosted by a commercial forum which is called an annual planning and leveling up update. With that, thank you to all and have a good morning. Goodbye.